Hello, welcome to another great episode of Royal Black and Elite. I want to thank you for joining me for today's lecture, a lecture where we're going to learn about a woman who was born into slavery and became one of the wealthiest black women of the 19th century. Please join me today as we learn about Amanda America Dickson. Amanda's beginning is similar to many of the women that we've studied from the 19th century. As you know, many of the slaveholders at that time violated women who were enslaved to them, and that was is what happened to Amanda's mom. Her name was Julia, and Julia, well, her whole name was Julia Frances Lewis Davis, and she was assaulted by David Dickson, which was the slave owner when she was only 12 years old. And Dickson was wealthy. He was a very wealthy man. He owned several slaves. And after he assaulted poor Julia, again, she was only 12 years old. When she had Amanda, she was 13. And he took the baby from her and gave the baby to his mother. Now, his mother's name was Elizabeth. I'm getting flashbacks to A Color Purple when they took that girl's baby away. But that's often what happened to these young little girls, 12 and 13, who had been violated. They took their children away. Now, oddly enough, even though he took her child and he still enslaved the child, it said that David truly loved Amanda, his new baby. And you can kind of tell he did because she lived in the house. His mother raised her. She was raised to understand etiquette. She learned how to read. And she could also play the piano. And that was not allowed for a lot of the other slaves. So it was clear that he did care for his daughter to some degree, and he had the money to do it. You see, by 1861, he was known as the Prince of Georgia Farmers, and he was exceedingly wealthy. Now he was awarded this because of his farming techniques, but I'm more than sure it was his slaves who were giving him all these farming techniques and who were giving him the ideas. And so, really, where are their awards and where is their money, who stood alongside him and built this business? But I digress. David really cared for Amanda with great care. And so I asked myself, I said, now why didn't he just free her then if he loved her so much? But in truth, in 1801, Georgia had passed a law where slave owners could not just summarily free their slaves. So that's the reason Amanda was not freed until the 13th Amendment passed in 1865 when she was 16 years old. And she didn't waste no time. She got out of there. She moved immediately, oddly enough, even though she was treated really well. She moved in 1866. She was still a kid then, 16 years old. And she moved with this man named Charles Eubanks. Now, some believe it was her husband. Back then, Georgia did not allow interracial marriages, so there's no paperwork on them being married. But they did live together for 4 years, and they had two children. The first one was named Julian, and the second one was named Charles. And Charles is going to come back in the story later on because he really brought the family's name completely down. Amanda only lived with Mr. Eubanks for about 4 years. By 1870, she and the babies were moving back into the large plantation with dad. So it doesn't say if they broke up, what happened, but she did move back home. And Charles was just a little baby then, so it wasn't too soon after she had given birth that she moved back home. Now, oddly enough, by 1873, which was only 3 years after she had moved, old Mr. Eubanks had passed away. And you know who else passed away? Clara Harris. That was David's wife. Now, can you only imagine? And David, of course, is Amanda's dad. Can you imagine how embarrassed she was to have someone who was half black, so everybody knew the child was black. And she was walking around there learning how to read, pretty much, running the whole show because they don't mention any of the children that David had. So I believe Amanda was, at least in this history, the only child he had. She was the only one he left money to. He left his entire estate. Well, hold on, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's back up. By 1885, it was February the 18th, 1885. So David passed away, and in his will, he left 17,000 acres to Amanda. Now, you can only imagine the white people in his family went crazy. They were like, no way. First of all, this is not his child. Second of all, this woman, Julia, because by then she was an adult, tricked him, and this is not his kid. But he didn't care. The paper was already signed and the ink was already dry. So they took her to court and she won. So then they appealed it, and the appeal judge, he had said that he was poised to overturn the case. He said he would rather be unalive than to rule in Amanda's favor. Well, he caught pneumonia a few days later and he passed away. So what was for Amanda was for Amanda. There may be somebody out here today waiting on something and believing that maybe they have lost it or it will not come their way. But this is evidence for you to see. The man that was her enemy was eliminated through pneumonia. So be encouraged, is all I'm trying to say. Amanda's life is encouraging. This man was the eighth wealthiest man in that whole county. And so she received all of his money, furniture, homes, jewelry, and 17,000 acres of land. So, Amanda was smart because her daddy had taught her how to deal with money and how to protect her money from like her husbands and from other people coming and get it. He must have knew something. And so Amanda took her little money and her children and her mama, and she moved to Augusta in 1886. She bought a large 7-bedroom home in a multicultural neighborhood, and she thrived. She became a member of the Black elite, and she was considered a socialite. Amanda even got remarried on July the 14th, 1892, to a very wealthy African American businessman. His name was Nathan Toomer. Now, here's kind of where the drama comes in once again with Charles. Remember, Charles is the youngest son, and he married the preacher's daughter. The older son, Julian, he actually married a young lady whose grandfather signed the Declaration of Independence. So Amanda didn't make her children be black or white. They decided who they wanted to be based upon the life that they lived. Amanda initially married a man who was white and had mixed race children, but when she married again, this man was an African American man. So she, I think, learned even probably from even being around her mother. She likely grew to love herself as a person, but also she understood that money and understood where it could place her within society. So she married Mr. Toomer, and Mr. Toomer had a daughter. Her name was Mamie. Well, for some odd reason, Charles was just infatuated with this girl. She was only 14 years old, but he was infatuated with her. He even planned a plot to kidnap her. That's right. He was going to kidnap his stepsister. They ran their name down. I mean, it was horrible that he would want to do this. They were indicted. It was in the newspaper. Now, Charles wasn't indicted because Amanda paid a great deal of money for him not to be. So that thing kind of, what a way to start a marriage. Your stepson wants to kidnap your daughter. So that's another story in her life. So Amanda lived a very interesting life. But this thing with Charles, it really got to her. You see, she had already been sick. She was getting ill more and more and more, so she wasn't feeling well, and the doctor said it was just pretty much from general exhaustion. Well, she and her husband, Mr. Toomer, came back home, and on their way home, they had paid for first class tickets. But even though they were free and wealthy black people, they were still discriminated against. And instead of riding in the first class accommodations from Baltimore that they had paid for, they were made to ride in the Pullman's car. And that was really close to the engine. So the whole time she was already ill, here she is breathing in the fumes from the Pullman's car exhaustion system. So by the time she made it home, she was not doing well at all. In fact, not not soon after she returned home, and she had only been married to her husband a little under a year. Amanda American Dickson passed away on June the 11th, 1893. You all, upon her passing, she did not leave a will. Yep, you heard me. She didn't leave a will, even though her father had left money for her to make sure she was going to be all right, taught her about money. She didn't leave a will. So this began a battle between her current husband, Mr. Toomer, who, mind you, hadn't even been married a year, and her mother and the two sons. So the mother and the two sons were on the same side. Well, they let cooler heads prevail, thank goodness, and they settled out of court, saving themselves tons of money in lawyers' fees and court fees. So that is the story of Amanda America Dickson, a socialite and one of the wealthiest Black women during the 19th century. What a story. I didn't like what David did. That was wrong. But I like that the fact that he did take care of his daughter. I'm bewildered as to why she didn't take care of her business at the end of her life, maybe because she was a younger woman, and she thought maybe she had more time to live. But I really enjoyed this story. I thank you for joining me, for liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please leave your comments down below. As always, our lecture is for entertainment and educational purposes only. And my main resource for this one was Wikipedia. Thank you for joining me for another great episode of Royal Black and Elite.